I am very fortunate that at 17, doesn't mean I'm smart. I've been very lucky. I was very lucky in my life that I knew what I wanted to do. Passionate about baseball, passionate about just taking care of athletes. I love the clubhouse. I love the athletic training room. So I've been very lucky and that I knew what I wanted to do from a young age. As clinicians, we have all of these tools in our toolbox, but that's all that they are. Yep. It's a tool in our toolbox. I don't care if they're the #1 kid ranked in the state. They might not be like mature enough, and I don't mean that psychologically, I just mean like physiologically, like knowing their body. I mean, how many times do you see a 14-year-old kid that's 6'6" and he's like Gumby, you know? Like these kids are still growing into their bodies, so they might feel something, but what they're feeling might actually be wrong, and we need to correct that. Just because you're there on a timeline doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready. Healing wise, maybe. Looking at a timeline, if I hit turbulence at 6 weeks, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna hit it. Maybe you don't hit it until 3 months when you start throwing. Over my career, I think I've seen for extrinsic factors, I can count on one hand how many kids didn't get back to play just because they didn't want to. Having industry bias, there is a specific brace that we can use to secure the UCL.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the MyoKinetic Podcast. Today, again, we got the home team here. Danny's here, Nick is here. We have a special guest, friend of the clinic, friend of the show, good friend of mine, Frank Alexander. He works for Dr. Chris Ahmad, which is obviously world-renowned when it comes to baseball injury, UCL, ACL, you name it. And the fact that we got Frank here, short notice, to come in and talk about what is new in this rehab world, especially when it comes to the new throwing program, and all of that stuff. So let's dive right in. Frank, what's up, man?
Natty, thank you so much for having me, guys. Nice to see you in person. Yes. And this is all new for me right now. The last time I was here a couple years ago, it was just me and Natty sitting downstairs. So this is awesome. I'm thrilled to be here. So some of the things that, as we were talking about before we got started with the throwing programs, is there's so much new stuff out there, but the new information, just because it's a new publication, doesn't mean it hasn't been stuff that's been around, at least in the baseball sports medicine community. So that's the hard thing to tease out. It's something new that is being broadcast worldwide now through the IJSPT, thanks to Mike Reinold and Lenny Macrina, the guys over at Champion. Of course, Dr. Andrews and Kevin Wilk, the guys down at ASMI. But the throwing programs themselves, I mean, Mike and those guys their call it landmark paper over 20 years ago. That's what really set the tone for interval throwing programs in healthy and even recovering athletes. So now we had to wait 20 plus years to get an update on it. And I think it's great. Like I said, it's new in the sports medicine community, but within the baseball world, it's stuff that we've been doing more recently. When I first started with Dr. Ahmad, going on 10 years ago now, the throwing programs we had set standpoints. So you had 60 feet, 90 feet, and 120 feet. And it was a matter of how long are you at each phase. And I think one of the things that we got away from with Mike's original throwing program was the oscillations, the up and down. And it was a little bit harder, at least for me as a collegiate athlete at that point in time. As studying athletic training, being a baseball player, trying to digest all of this information, how did I, looking at this sheet of paper and looking at step 1, and I'm like, okay, but I had to bring that paper with me everywhere.
Yeah,
definitely.
Still do it now.
Still do, yeah.
Exactly.
Cell phone, is that paper?
Right.
I'm going to get that to my form. All right, cool.
Phase 2, okay, we're good. All right, 60 feet, mark it out with some cones.
Yeah.
So the way that when I came to Ahmad's office was, how can we take some of this information but simplify it so that you knew that in your mesocycles, if you will, right? In 6-week intervals, we know 6 weeks I'm at 60 feet. And again, this is just being very broad stroke. This isn't getting into the science of it all. But 60 feet, and I know for 6 weeks I'm there. And then I have a download. And then for 6 weeks I'm at 90 feet. Then I have a download. Then I'm at 120 feet, and then you move on to whatever it is, your position specific, or whether you're a position player or a pitcher, then you go from there. But so what I did originally back then, 10 years ago, was I just kept it very simple. We got away from Mike's original program just because of those oscillations, and we kept it simple, right? And that's, I think, a large part of what we have to do as clinicians. We have to make things easier for these kids to digest. And even at the higher levels, we have to make it easier. No matter how smart a Ivy League baseball player is, you gotta make it simple. So when we look at that, the 60, 90, 120, right now, within the last 3-4 years, there's been a significant shift in the baseball landscape. You have the pulse sleeve, formerly Modus. You have all of these other metrics that are being thrown in your face, whether it's with a Rapsodo and spin rates. And one of the big things that we're talking about nowadays is not so much spin rate, but horizontal and vertical break. So guys throwing a slider, or now you're hearing more about a sweeper pitch. So instead of a sweeper, a slider is a little bit more, if you're thinking about a clock face, it's more like 2 to 8 on a clock face. Now we're looking at 3 to 9. Oh, wow. So they're looking more at that horizontal break. And I kind of think of it a little bit more like a Boomer Wells years ago. I mean, I remember watching him throw. He had this big sweeping curveball that at that, it was still a curveball back then, but it started at a lefty's shoulder and it landed in the strike zone. So something as significant as that, but now we're talking more about break in the pitch rather than spin rate, although spin rate is still something that people are highly looking at. So the shift in just the baseball training mindset has gotten away from, okay, we just need distance. Now we have all these metrics at our disposal. And when I look at it, it's a little bit of analysis by paralysis, paralysis by analysis. And you're just getting so much data. And when I talk to kids about their throwing programs, it's more about, how do you feel?
Exactly.
Because you can be hitting all your metrics and you can look great and whatever, but if your elbow or shoulder or whatever feels like crap, what good is that
good for
doing
you?
for
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
But my spin is great.
The spin's great. Yeah,
but it shows great, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes they still say that I'm feeling my elbow.
Right. And I talked to a pitching coach local in New Jersey here, and he had a professional player come down. The major league pitching coach lives upstate New York, so he actually drove down. The pitching coach got stuck in traffic. He wasn't able to actually watch the guy throw. But the pitching coach that I know, who this guy trains with during the offseason, he's like, yeah, he's hitting all of his metrics on the Rapsodo, but that was a garbage session. The pitching coach comes in and is like, wow, he hit all of these numbers. And the coach that I work with, he's like, dude, you should have been here because he sucked.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing. I think that's the problem with a lot of the younger generation is where they're looking at just those numbers because that's what colleges might look at. They're going to be like, okay, what's your, velo? What is your speed? What is this? What is this? So they just want to see those numbers. So that's why our kids, we are so fixated on these numbers and we don't even show them. We'll have the iPad towards us and like, oh, how was that throw? Like, what was my spin rate? Like, don't worry about that. Just how did it feel for you in general? Is there soreness there, pain, anything?
As clinicians, we have all of these tools in our toolbox, but that's all that they are.
Yep.
It's a tool in our toolbox. And it's like having BFR. If you don't use BFR appropriately, what's the point of having it?
Man.
Like there's so many
Just tourniquet.
dry needling, stuff like that. And there's, again, these are tools in our toolbox to help these guys. Yeah. It's not the end all be all. And I think that that's something that the overall athletic population can understand a little bit better. Yeah. There are even some clinicians out there that are like, oh, this is going to be like your cure-all. And it's like, whoa, maybe not. Like maybe if you use it in this way, it could help you out. But if you use it that way, you're going to wind up setting yourself backwards. So it's tough. Yeah.
I think the way you break it down, like those metrics are kind of like SAT score, right? They just kind of give you an overview, like, is this kid going to be able to do well in the school? But it doesn't assess the quality. Like it doesn't assess like the personality, like does he have the grit? But I think when we look at quality of movement in conjunction with the matrix, how did he get to that matrix, right? Was it like a hard effort to get that, right? So like we do a long toss, let's say 90 feet. If it was like a max effort to get 90 feet, then that's a yellow flag for us, right? It should be effortless, feel good. I think some of the best things that when we talk about was like, hey, how much arm do you use? If they say, oh, I didn't feel my arms at all, everything was just kind of going through it. I'm like, great, that's what we want, right? And I think the best tool we have is our iPhone, and we just break down front foot strikes, see where they're at. do they have dissociation? Yes or no, right? Where when we have parents coming in, we have, shout out to the guy at Pitch Logic for just hooking us up with the ball. It's great because when it's raining out, we can do long toss in here. But then when the kids see all these other majors, we have to kind of like push them away from it, right? Like, hey, stop like downloading all the graph. Don't tell me where you're releasing and all that stuff. Just let me know how you're actually using your hips.
Sorry.
Yeah, and again, to the point of just feeling. And like sometimes if you feel your front shoulder open up and you're flying out here, and I know not that people that are not going to be watching this are going to be able to see what I just did, but listening, like if your front shoulder flies open and your back arm, your throwing arm is dragging behind you, that's a feel thing. Now you got to speed up. Some of the other things that we look at in the kinetic chain before we clear a guy to throw, like what if they have a hip discrepancy? What if they're just not able to move the way that they need to move? And sometimes guys can't feel that, but it's something as clinicians that we're able to see. And it's something that a good pitching coach is able to see too, in terms of like shoulder and hip separation, making sure that, like you, Natty, like you said about land leg and stuff like that. Those are sometimes not high level players can feel that. Younger guys, sometimes they don't. And no matter, I don't care if they're the number one kid ranked in the state, they might not be like mature enough. And I don't mean that psychologically. I just mean like physiologically, like knowing their body. I mean, how many times do you see a 14-year-old kid that's 6'6" and he's like Gumby, you know? Like these kids are still growing into their bodies. So they might feel something, but what they're feeling might actually be wrong and we need to correct that.
They think it's normal, or they heal quicker too. They might be sore. It's like, oh yeah, it's normal because they can heal quicker until before something breaks.
Right, and that's the hard thing too. I used to love the question, and when I say love, it's a little sarcasm there. What, as an athlete, are you injured or are you hurt? Oh, come on, you know, like, and the way as I got older and progressed through my career, it really became down to, is this normal soreness that I'm feeling after a game, after an outing, after whatever workout I just had, or am I not able to go today? So am I good to go, but I'm just sore and maybe I need to modify what I'm doing? Or is this a no-go day? And am I in trouble? Like, am I setting myself up for a bad situation? So one of the things that we looked at years ago was some of the research with Tommy John surgery. We found that in 4 years, one way or the other from your Tommy John surgery, you're actually going to wind up with a hip issue. So guys that are having hip issues wind up having Tommy John surgery. Whether or not you're aware of that hip issue before or after is a different story. But again, talking about the kinetic chain and being able to do that, it's something that we've noticed and we can now modify. And it's part of what we've been doing within our practice is developing this return to throwing assessment that is all body comprehensive. And it's the plyos that everybody's using. And plyos, when I say everybody, meaning us and as physical therapists, athletic trainers, using plyos as a rehab tool, not as a velo enhancement tool. And that's one of the issues leading into a throwing program too, is making sure that these guys are ready from a whole body standpoint, right?
Definitely. I think that's one thing that we really do well here is just try to like nitpick. And we always say, Natty says, like, we're dance moms. We're trying to nitpick every little thing here to make sure that you have the prereqs to even do the activity. So if you don't have the, to start with the range of motion, you don't have the awareness of where your body is, the strength in the hips, right? Single leg stance we talk a lot about, especially pitchers. Yeah, if you don't have those prereqs to even get into the positions to throw, then why are you throwing? So I think that's a huge part that we try to, fine tune with a lot of our athletes, especially youth athletes.
Yeah, we don't mind getting in the arguments, in a good argument with the parents and there, because they're like, no, we're ready. I'm like, no, you're not. We have to check our boxes.
Just because you're there on a timeline, and I get this all the time, just because you're there on a timeline doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready. Healing wise, maybe. Like, let's just say UCL reconstructions, Tommy John surgery. We know that, and we could dive into, maybe this could be part 2, is this new hybrid operation that's going on. But like, you have a repair or a reconstruction. Well, I'll leave hybrid out of this for right now. But you have a repair. We know around 3 months that you should be ready to throw. Should be. Doesn't necessarily mean that just because if and I don't want to date this episode, but let's just say I have surgery May 10th. Just because I should be ready to throw on August 10th doesn't mean that I need to have a ball in my hand. And there's different things that we need to see, whether it's in the surgeon's office or from a rehab standpoint, that, okay, now we're good to go.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, yes, we're following a time continuum, but I equate to, and everybody I think has seen Mike Reynolds' graph of what a recovery actually looks like. I equate it to an airplane ride because you know that there's going to be turbulence in the air. It's a matter of where are you hitting it. Not everybody is going to hit turbulence. Just because everybody flies from New York, whether it's LaGuardia or JFK to Tampa, just because I hit it over Newark one time doesn't mean that you're going to hit it over Newark. Right. You might hit it over Charlotte.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's fair.
So there's, and again, looking at a timeline, if I hit turbulence at 6 weeks, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hit it. Maybe you don't hit it until 3 months when you start throwing. So, and maybe it's a little bit of a flexor inflammation thing or whatever it may be. I saw an MMA fighter the other day, believe it or not, we reconstructed her UCL for her, but she's getting ready to fight. And in her training, she now broke her thumb. So it's like, she's like, well, I'm going to fight because I've fought with broken thumbs before, but it's one of those things that just because your elbow is healed, now you got something else going on.
Yeah, so, you're going to compensate somewhere else. And I think I love the point you brought up just because the timeline or the charts say that you're ready to go doesn't mean you're ready to go. It's kind of like driving, right? We have a bunch of kids that just got their driver license.
Scary.
Doesn't mean they can drive
things,
well,
man.
right? It's the same thing. Like, I got my driver license. I was like, well, you're not ready to drive on a highway.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, you got to earn every single thing. And it's always a good fight worth having with the kids and the parents to say, hey, we need to see this X, Y, and Z, right? Nick and Danny say it really well. It's like, you got to earn the right to have the ball in your hand.
Yeah. I love that. You do. It's not a God-given right that at 3 months or 4.5 months that ball is magically going to appear.
And we take it away too. We have to take it away.
Definitely.
Taking it away, the ball.
Lock up their gloves and put them.
You
got to.
Because the best, they walked in, they're like, are we throwing today? We always like, let's see how you look.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Let's see how you look.
Did you do things at home? Did you do the things you're supposed to do? You know, your exercises, your stretching, all the things that you had to do there so that you can come in here, you can throw. If you didn't, okay, guess what we're doing now? We're doing all those little things you should have did.
Yeah.
And
hold them accountable, really.
It sucks to be on the other end of that as a kid. And I try to put myself in their situation sometimes. But at the end of the day, again, like you just said, it's homework. Yeah. If I don't put into it, like I can't walk into any PT clinic and whether it's with you guys or even on like, I can't expect you guys to bridge the gap that I'm not filling.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
like, I can't want them more than you also.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Like that's a huge thing too. I'm curious where like in that aspect, you see like, you know, from the youth to the high school to college to pro guys, like how do you see that like work ethic changing? I'm sure like, you know, when you get to the higher levels, you know, some financial things that come involved with it.
There's always that dream, right?
Yeah.
No matter, even the pro guys, there's a dream of a big contract.
Yeah.
You know, they want the long term. Speaking in generalities, most guys want to get that long-term contract. I think I just saw recently that somebody retired after 3 major league games, you know, and he achieved his goal. So now, hey, you know what? I did it.
Everybody's different, yeah.
And it was a hard fight for him. Like I know that he had a couple surgeries in the minors and stuff like that, but at least from what I recall, if it's the same guy that I'm thinking of, but there's something that is overall a common theme with guys that have UCL injuries, and it's that determination to get back to the field.
Yep.
I have not seen a player, no matter how old they are, undergo surgery to not get back to a baseball field.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, I've seen parents want it more than their kids. And that is probably the hardest situation because the kid might not want to tell their parents that, but there's so many different social cues that you're like, wow, this kid just doesn't want it. And look, I'm a former player. And for me, it's like, when I see that, I'm kind of a little bit heartbroken, you know, like, cause I want,
what made you lose that love? Like,
right.
Something.
Why isn't that fire burning?
Yeah.
And on the other end of it, why did you just go through surgery? You know, like tell us beforehand. Like nobody wants to. I don't know a doctor out there that wants to operate on a kid that doesn't want to have an operation. And it's a different story when kids don't want to talk about the social or extrinsic factors that are pressuring them, whether it's their parents, their coaches. And over my career, I think I've seen for extrinsic factors, I can count on one hand how many kids didn't get back to play just because they didn't want to. And again, UCL surgeries on a whole, there's a 90% success rate. Nobody really talks about that 10%, unfortunately. But you hear about the success stories about a couple of years ago, there was a major leaguer after 3 Tommy Johns. He was 30 or in his early 30s, and he got back and he played in the postseason. I think he was with the Nationals at the time. And those are feel-good stories. But the fact that he had 3 Tommy Johns to get there, it's a lot. It's a lot of surgery. It's a lot of mental grind. And I think if there's anything that's good out of COVID is the overall healthcare's acknowledgement and acceptance that there's a lot more than just treating the physical athlete. Like we're doing such a better job, in my opinion, of the psychological component of all of this. But again, this is a two-way street. I can only help you as much as you're telling me.
Yeah, as much as you want me to help you.
I can't do more than if you're not going to give it to me.
I think ask the right questions. I think that's one thing that we can at least control on our side is asking the questions, see like the other factors that might be impacting this. And also I think some of the youth athletes, like asking them, not asking the parents. Because at them, it's at the point we want to get to know what are you feeling here, not what your parents feeling.
Yeah.
You guys, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but you guys have a very unique perspective in that because you're treating the athlete one-on-one.
Yeah.
For me, it's in the office, I'm with them and the parent. I don't get a lot of one-on-one time unless the kid asks to speak in confidentiality, and that's usually few and far between. Yeah. But that's where you guys have such a unique ability to share more with us on the back end
to
of
the doctors,
things.
exactly.
Right. So that to me is such an invaluable tool. And being able to shoot you guys a text message on any given day after we see an athlete, like, hey, what are you guys seeing? We have a kid who I just don't think that he wants to get back to play. And he's actually seen 2 physical therapists, one that he's been treating and another one that's closer to home. He was actually going like an hour away for PT. And that therapist is like, you need to do more. Like, I don't want you coming once a week. I'd rather you do 2 or 3 times a week at home and maybe supplement with me once a month. And even the second physical therapist that's close to home, she's like, I'm not really sure if this kid's going to want to get back to throwing. And he should be clear to throw right around this time. And I haven't heard anything from him.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, right, you're growing up, you're throwing gas, and everyone's just hyping you up. And it's almost just come naturally. You're just like, I'm just throwing, and I'm just throwing harder. And it's almost like they're doing something right, but they don't know how they got there. And then when the car breakdown, let's say, now you have to learn how to fix it, and you have to go back to the drawing board. You got to learn how to lower your scap. You got to do all these other things. You're probably the first time touching weight and actually training and have a true off season, and you realize that like you're in this pit of just grinding it out. You're trying to climb out. Like, I mean, I love the analogy from the third Batman with Bane, where he has to climb out that pit. Right? And that's exactly what they have to go through. And then when you climb out that, Nick and Danny always touch on it, is that it's a long season, right? Fall ball, right? Winter workout, spring. And then you have all this pressure. And then you have this preconceived notion of your previous identity of the kid who's throw gas. So now you have to live up to that expectation. And then people are questioning you. You still have it. You question yourself. Now all your peers are gone, right? And it's a lot of pressure for like someone who's like 17, 16.
They're still kids. They're still kids. And that's the thing that's like, look, I graduated high school. My birthday's in November. So I graduated high school at 17 years old. I am very fortunate that at 17 years, doesn't mean I'm smart. I've been very lucky. But I was very lucky in my life that I knew what I wanted to do. Passionate about baseball, passionate about just taking care of athletes. I love the clubhouse. I love the athletic training room. So I've been very lucky and that I knew what I wanted to do from a young age. But even ask an 18 or 22-year-old what they want to do. I mean, how many college kids do you see that they're in sophomore or junior year and you're like, what are you majoring in? And they're like, I'm still undecided.
Yeah. Man.
Sociology.
Like,
what does that mean?
What does that mean?
I was picking my daughters up from daycare yesterday and one of the girls is like, oh, I'm going to St. John's. So I was like, what are you going to study? She's like, biology. I was like, yeah, what do you want to do? And because I know that when you're going into biology, at least from my experience, there's something after that you're looking to do. And she said she wanted to be a pediatrician. I was like, oh man, I know what it's like. Look, I have 2 daughters. I know what it's like to be a parent, and then working with kids and having that relationship with other parents. I think it gives you a different perspective too. But on the other end, back to what you said, Natty, when you're an athlete and you need to have surgery, your identity just completely shifts. And we actually should be coming out soon. I'm waiting for it to hit OJSM. We did a psychological impact of UCL injuries and PTSD paper. And this has been my baby for the last couple of years.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately, we snagged during COVID, and that delayed us getting it finalized. But it's been submitted, it's been accepted, so I feel comfortable talking about it. But what we found is that guys are actually showing signs of PTSD to a point where it's a clinical concern.
Wow.
And even some guys have been so high on the Horowitz impact of events scale that they're at risk for future immune system compromise.
Really?
These guys have significant trauma psychologically from tearing a ligament in their elbow that from the outside, if you're not in this world, guys don't really I can't even tell you, my family, they're all baseball fans, but when somebody tears their UCL, I'm like, man, that's crushing. They're like, what do you mean? They're going to come back, they're going to throw harder, they're going to have a good career, and they're going to still make their millions of dollars. 90% of the time, yeah. But their identity now as a rehabbing athlete, that's such a dynamic shift.
Yeah.
You're not there grinding and competing every day with your friends, your teammates, the guys that you're going to war with proverbially. It's such a hard thing for some people.
And families too.
Yeah.
It affects the family. We talk about that a lot.
Such a dynamic, just because if I'm in a bad spot, then my wife and my daughters are going to feel it too. And it doesn't matter that I'm not a professional athlete or who I'm taking care of, it has a ripple effect. But thankfully we've gotten the rehab down. We've gotten these throwing programs down, thankfully more to a science these days. Things are more predictable and we understand these timelines better, but it doesn't guarantee that the shoe's going to fit everybody the same. Just because I wear a size 10 in Nike doesn't mean I wear a size 10 in Reebok.
I love that you just touched on that, especially the PTSD thing.
That's huge.
Now that we think about it, it's that makes sense because it's one of those injury where it happened and you're like, well, if I do this over and over again, how do I know it's not going to happen again, right? The one thing we start to implement here, we use Angela Duckworth grit scale, right? And we want to do that and give it to the parents to fill out with the kids before they even come see us, just to see where they're at mentally. Are they going to have that dog in them? Are they going to be able to climb through? Right. Speaking of dog, Cody's here.
Yeah.
So if we know that,
he always finds his way to Natty's lap.
I felt something on my leg. And I was like, whoa.
I'm sorry about that.
If the parents can sit down and get to know their kids, oh wow, he does have that grit. He's going to be able to mentally find his way through this. Great. Then it's good investment, time investment, worth exploring surgery.
Yeah.
Definitely. And there's also not only just the grit and determination, it's also resiliency. When I talk to kids, they're going to, and again, if you take two 16-year-olds and one of them had UCL surgery and the other one didn't, the one that had surgery has a different outlook and a different appreciation for hard work. And I'm not saying that the other 16-year-old, just because they didn't have surgery, doesn't understand work ethic. It just means that they have a different perspective of it. They didn't have to claw and fight and understand that getting to 130 degrees of flexion sometimes is a real tricky thing to do. Right? So just because I can do this very easily, flex and extend my elbow, doesn't necessarily mean that that's a given for that kid tomorrow. And again, our rehab protocols are so much more improved than where we were. And even going back to Mike's throwing program 20 years ago, there's been so many more improvements. And I'll touch back on that in a minute, but so many different things that we've learned. And even the programs that I was doing 10 years ago that we've smoothed out to eliminate those bumps and try to minimize the turbulence that guys are going to feel in their throwing programs.
I think the one thing we've been really cautious about and detail-oriented about is creating an environment for success. If we can schedule kids who are going through the same thing, UCL, and they get to be among one another in the same time spot, that's huge because now you have something to aim up to, right? So if you come in, you see other kids at 2 weeks ahead of you, oh, wow, they're doing that. Oh, man, I know I'm struggling right now. The kids that's throwing might be like, yo, bro, I was in the same spot you were 2 weeks ago, and now look at what I'm doing, right? So now the environment kind of dictate what they can feel is achievable. Because all we need to do is just give them a roadmap and say, hey, just follow these paths. Just, show up, do your homework, listen, take care of yourself, and then just follow the roadmap. And if we hit any potholes or whatever it is, we're going to address that together, right? And that's just kind of, we want to lay out that game plan ahead of time, especially for the parents, right? So that way they kind of have 80% of an idea what's going to happen. But then most of the time, the other 20%, we have to improvise because rehab, like you say, is not linear, right? It's cycling up, cycling down.
And I think to your point too, Natty, about having other kids, what you're filling your windshield with is so important because, and it's nice to have other guys along that continuum. It's nice to have guys that are very short in order. Like if you had surgery today and then you got another guy who's 2 weeks, 4 weeks. And again, this is a perfect world and a vacuum that we're talking about. But then even having a guy that's one or plus years out, you know, for guys are just fresh out of surgery to see, hey, this is what I can be doing. That is a game changer.
You see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. And give you a goal to go after. Now, maybe that other guy is throwing 92 and you're 10 months out and you shouldn't be throwing 92 miles an hour. But and again, we were talking about coaches and colleges that are recruiting these kids and they want to see numbers. And we had a kid who he had Tommy John surgery and we told him he was in his mound throwing program. We told him he should be throwing at a perceived effort of 80%. But the school that he was committed to said, we want you at, if you were throwing 92 miles an hour pre-surgery, when we come see you, you need to be throwing 92. And I slammed on the brakes with this guy. And I said to the player, I was like, you're 10 months out from surgery. You do not need to be throwing 92 miles an hour right now. You're doing 100 off a cliff, on a rainy day. This isn't driving up 80 on a sunny day and there's no traffic. I'm talking you're trying to do 80 through rush hour and it's raining. Like you are reckless right now. But we need to dial this back. And you see both ends of the extremes though too. You see guys that are going a little bit too slow because maybe that's just their nature is being cautious. But then on the other end, you got to make sure that guys aren't, and we can't control everything, right? Nobody lives in a vacuum. We can only control what we can control and educate these players the best as we can. And I think this is where you guys do a great job with podcasting and everything else that's out there. There's so many resources that are available to you. On the other end of that, you got to make sure that those resources are reputable. You know, you got to listen to the guys that are in the trenches all day, every day, and making sure that you're getting sound advice.
Not just Dr. Google.
Dr. TikTok. That's a new one for me.
Can you touch upon, obviously, timeline of healing, but you put a graph in there. That graph needs to turn into a ligament. Again, biologically speaking, healing takes time and it's different from everybody. We talk about that all the time.
Can't rush biology.
Yeah.
No, you can't. I don't want to say you can't speed up biology, but you could
with the right resources in the right country. That is not in the U.S.
in the right area. But the cool thing, and without being what's the right word? Industry bias, having industry bias, there is a specific brace that we can use to secure the UCL. I don't know what the trade name of it, but everybody calls it the UCL repair with internal brace. The internal brace is great. It's collagen coated. Our body loves collagen. It wants to heal with that. And that has to be done in the right situation. You cannot, and I'll give as best of a mental visual as I can. When we think about the UCL, think of it as a rope connecting two bones, right? If that rope is pulled off of one bone, we can sew that back down and we could do a repair on that. If it's blown apart in the middle and you have like two mop ends, you just can't repair that. I mean, you could in theory, but you don't know what you're going to get on the end, at the end goal. The other thing that I've seen with repair operations is a ligament that's stretched. It's not necessarily torn, but the best way I equate it to a player is like when we assess it intraoperatively, it's like overcooked pasta. It's just mushy. It's just going to fall apart. That's not a good ligament for repair. And unfortunately, in our practice, we see a lot of guys that have been given a repair that should have actually had a reconstruction. And that's such a hard thing because the appeal of the UCL repair is so tantalizing. 6 months before I'm back on a mound pitching in a game somewhere between 8 and 9 months.
Sign me up.
Seriously, compared to a year, man, I will take that in the right situation. I'll take that. In the right situation. That's the hardest thing because for some players, no matter what their perception is of the time pressure around them, that's not the best operation for them. And I tell players this all the time. I've yet to meet a player that's woken up from surgery and we tell them like, hey, we're going to try to repair it, but we're going to convert if we need to a reconstruction. Yeah. I have never had a kid wake up from surgery hoping for a repair and punch me in the face that he got a reconstruction because he knew in that point in time that repair was not going to last him and his career would have been derailed even further.
Yeah, you guys made the best decision at that moment.
In that point in time for them. And guys are at peace with that because they wake up knowing like, I might not have to go through this again.
Yeah.
Like if they had a repair and we're like, we repaired it and this is a hypothetical. We've never done this, where it's, I just don't know what you're going to get out of it. Like if I pick up a ball the first time that I throw, and again, if it's 45 feet at just playing catch at a slow arm speed, and that thing falls apart, not that we would expect it to because of all the rehab stuff that we talked about, but if it fails early on, it's not a good situation.
Yeah. All right, Frank. So obviously, we're running short on time, and again, appreciate you being here. So, what are some closing statement takeaways? Right, if they have to fast forward to the end, what would you want the parents, the athletes, to take away from this?
Yeah, the abstract. Yeah. Well, thank you guys again so much for having me. I definitely want to come back, and we're going to do more on throwing athletes, throwing programs, UCLs. I could talk about this all day long. And probably ad nauseum for any population, despite their love of baseball and all things Tommy John surgery. We do have to talk about that hybrid reconstruction at some point in time. I'll leave that as a cliffhanger. Yep. The couple different things that I'll leave you guys with. Our throwing programs now are so much better. The stuff that Reinhold and their team just came out with. It's great stuff. It's stuff that's been being done at the higher levels, and I'm glad to see that that's trickling down now into the youth levels. In terms of recovery, especially from surgeries, don't rush your timelines. Everybody talks about this. This phrase actually makes me want to punch myself in the face for saying it, but trust the process. Trust the people around you that are telling you that what you're feeling is okay. Even though I'm saying that, trust your intuition as well. As a parent, as a player, if something doesn't feel right, say something. Yeah. Now, in a PT rehab setting, there is going to be some pain, some discomfort. Understand that. On the other end of it, if you are unable to participate in your next therapy session or do whatever your next workout is, whether it's playing catch, even at 45 feet, if you're unable to complete that session because of pain, stop what you're doing, talk to your physical therapist, call your doctor's office, follow your gut and reach out to your, call it confidants.
Yeah.
That's really it in terms of how players can best advocate for themselves. No, and definitely. It's such a hard thing for young kids to do at 16, 17 years old, because at that age, you want to keep everybody happy. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to please everybody else, you're never going to be true to yourself.
Yeah, don't push through stuff. Like, if you're feeling something, you're feeling the pain, you're feeling, extreme soreness, talk to us, and that's what we're here for. Yeah. We're here to help you through that process and understand what's happening and put you into the right places where you need to be.
Yeah. Last thing, on that note, for the people who are not in Jersey, in New York, if they were looking to find a team, build a team that with good rehab professional, what was something that you would advise them to look for?
Some of the things that you want to look for, and I do this a lot with a lot of our players that are remote to us. Mm-hmm. They fly into New York, have surgery, and then they fly back out, whether it's, we have a lot of kids, believe it or not, in Wisconsin, even kids all the way upstate New York near the Canadian border. You got to find people that have experience. And that is the biggest thing. And again, this is a very relative statement because my experience being in the metro New York area, we have a dense population. There's a lot of kids in this area. It's very different than if you are in the mountains of New York. There may be less kids in that area. I mean, even if you drive an hour and a half north of the city, there's still on the east side of the Hudson, there's still less kids up that way. Like, we had one guy that he needed to travel an hour and a half to find a good PT. So experience is very relative. And if you see 1 or 2 UCLs a year, that could be high volume for where you are. Yeah. We do this week alone. On Tuesday, Ahmad had to cut his OR short this week. He did 6 operations. All 6 of them were Tommy John surgeries.
Sheesh.
So that, to me, that's a normal day. Some people don't see that in a career, So again, experience is being what it is. But if you have somebody If you have a reputable doctor, seek out people that are, if you are in the Midwest, look for your favorite team's baseball team doctor. Find that doc, because the chances are they see a ton of elbow injuries. You got to go hunt them down. And they're going to be your resource if our office can't be it for you. Look, we're a resource for everybody. We got kids coast to coast. But if you want to reach out, I'm happy to help people that are in need and they're looking for it. Look, I'm very fortunate enough to know people from the East Coast to the West Coast and everywhere in between. And having guys like you guys that are local to us and being able to disseminate more information, hey, that's what this is all about, is helping people.
Yeah. Awesome. Frank, thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Looking forward to next time for sure.
We'll block 3 hours. We'll beat you over.
Please, for sure.